What's up, everybody? Peter Exorcist Buffer here, opening up another line of inquiry, a new sort of, uh, I don't know, brand, I guess, since I'm in the branding, uh, product line, so to speak. But I mean, I hate that word, hate that phrase. A new line of inquiry. How about that? The Purple Manifesto, Prince's life, music, and philosophies. That's, I'm a big Prince fan. If you haven't listened to a lot of episodes, Prince is that dude for me. So I'm going to take a real deep dive into Prince. When I say real, because I'm going to, slowly but surely work my way through all of his albums. Start today with For You. We're going to do them all. We're going to do, even that stuff from the 90s, or in the 2000s when he broke off, when Prince was, you know, uh, kind of definitely doing his own thing, covering them all. And for those asking, yeah, the Black Album's is part of the canon of Prince, even though it's not available right now. We'll obviously discuss that further when we get into Black Album, but in the second episode, on the, you know, dive into the Prince bootlegs. But yeah, he pulled it and put Lovesexy in there instead. But he did release it to the public in the early '90s, and then uh, he released it again. I mean, Prince's entire catalog, the only place where it was available upon his passing was on Tidal, and the Black Album was available on Tidal. So Prince has released the album twice, and we'll get into the whole, you know, all the stuff about Prince and the Black Album, and what all that meant. But yeah, I consider the Black Album part of the canon, even though it's not out. And when I get there, I'll cover it twice. I'll cover it, you know, in Lovesexy, because he went through as famously about three or four different titles, following uh, Sign of the Times. So yeah, and then I will cover it again, when it was officially released. So For You was released April 7th, 1978, just about 2 months shy of Prince's 20th birthday. Um, and I had an interesting relationship with this album because, as a little bit of background, my first exposure with the Prince was, that very first time I ever ran across him was in high school. And my best friend in high school at the time must have been, uh, my sophomore year. And his little sister had a poster of Prince, that the famous Dirty Mind, I think it was, picture in the shower. And I was like, who is this guy? What the hell is that? And then, so he kind of, you know, I was like, who is this? She's like, that's Prince. I'm like, okay. And then, then when 1999 drops, then again, I'm introduced to his music and kind of like the music. I'm like, okay, this guy is a little different, but he's pretty cool. Um, and I remember, the first videos on MTV. And I covered this in, the classic songs for Let's Go Crazy. So, couple days out of graduation, early June 1984, bam, I go to boot camp for the Marine Corps. So I missed a drop of a Purple Rain in the movie. I remember One Doves Cry was out when I left, and I was like, okay, that's kind of weird, but it is kind of good too. So I came back, started at Ohio State University, um, late August 1984, maybe. Because Ohio State was on the quarter system. Maybe it was, early September. I don't remember, but I mean, 3 or 4 days after I'm back, in Columbus, Ohio, I hear Let's Go Crazy for the first time, and I literally went crazy. And I've been a Prince diehard, he's my guy. I remember I heard that, and literally there was a music store around the corner from my house. I went to see it, right there in High Street. And I was just off of High Street. So I was about 3 buildings away and I just no, that's my apartment. I was in the dorms. I'm sorry. That was my second place, but I was in the dorms, and High Street in Columbus and the Ohio State area at that time had a whole bunch of record stores. I mean, you know, college campuses are known for bookstores and record stores, and Ohio State had the record stores. And so all I remember is rushed out and got For You, Prince. I got a double cassette. One side was Dirty Mind, the other side was Controversy, 1999, and Purple Rain. So that's how I got into Prince. And to be blunt about it, it took me a long time to really get into For You and appreciate it. And really, honestly, it wasn't until Prince passed. And really noticed that For You is one of those albums where you got to really, really listen to it. You can't really be, to really get its brilliance. And then, you can't be doing other things. You got to give it your 100% full attention. And I think that was by design. I mean, even though Prince is 19 at the time, I think that's by design because everybody was like, you can't do this. He's too young. He's 19 years old. He's playing all the instruments, and of course, to get to that, uh, they would, the Warner Brothers executives were, invited into the studio while Prince laid down all of the tracks for just as long as we're together. And so he kind of proved with that he had the chops. Um, but I think he did. He designed this album this way on purpose, and he wanted you to pay attention. He kind of you know subtly and slyly sneak up on you. So but even still, even though he did knock it out of the park with Just As Long As We're Together, the corporate suits at Warner Brothers still wanted someone to look over the shoulder, and executive producers is the term. And so they wanted to brought in Tommy Vicara. That was actually Owen Husney, Prince's manager, his first manager at the time, wanted Tommy Vicara, and they did not get along. And the label wanted Verdine White, bass player for Earth, Wind and Fire, brother of Maurice White. And Prince clashed with Tommy Vicara. I've never been able to find out what, if anything, Verdine White knowing Verdine, and I've seen him interviewed with Bootsy Collins. Even though that historic '70s rivalry between Earth, Wind and Fire and P Funk. Bootsy, even though he's a solo artist, was part of P Funk at first. I think Verdine just went in there like, yeah, this guy doesn't need me here. Let me just, I'll sit back here and say nothing, and I'll slip out of the room. I think that's kind of, Verdine was, probably pretty quickly figured out Prince knew what he was doing and what he wanted to do. So, this album went 5 times over budget, and, Prince, Chris Moon had a studio back in Minneapolis in the mid '70s, and so Prince did have some studio experience. This is where Chris Moon and Prince, did a rough demo for Soft and Wet, and so Prince had been in the studio before, and so yeah, he went in there and he did his thing. There's a lot going on with this first album. Early on in the album, it has a very 1970s sound to it. It's Prince's probably his most, and Prince, the second album, has a little bit, they're both rooted in the '70s. I mean, Prince wasn't that dude yet where he could look forward, and, and, you know, plant a flag a couple miles up the road for everybody to chase. That really, the inkling started for that, for controversy, in definitely 1999. So this is definitely a 70s album, because it is, of course, it's 1978, and I I don't know, but to me, it has a really that Philly international sound to it. Just as long as we're together, the first portion of that song, "In Love," um, talking about, who's Philly international. Well, you had a little bit, the OJ's, that sound is part of that. Even though Barry White wasn't part of Philly international, but a little bit of Barry is there. Um, and then Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. It just has that kind of feel to it. Yeah, so that's kind of my first impressions. One of the unique things about this album, and his second album, Prince, is Prince did a lot of acoustic guitar ballads in these albums. So this has Crazy You, Baby, and So Blue. And Prince really did not return to this, doing, uh, I mean, How Come You Don't Call Me Anymore was on the piano, was kind of, uh, an acoustic, but he didn't do much acoustic stuff after this. And obviously in the early 2000s, he comes out with Truth, uh, which is, Prince on his acoustic guitar. And, he also, One Night Alone with Prince on the piano doing acoustic stuff. Um, but yeah, so Crazy You is here, Baby, and So Blue. And, Baby's sort of one of the standouts because, it's about, the lyrics are pretty, uh, mature for, a 19-year-old. And, it's one of the deep, cuts on the album that the fans really love. Um, for me, the most underrated song on the album is Just As Long As We're Together. Love this song. Um, it's one of the most sophisticated funk songs on the album, and his musicianship is top notch. Interestingly enough, it's two songs in one. So the first part of this song essentially is a disco song, and the second part is a instrumental, a funk jam instrumental, and this was done back in recorded in 1976 under the title Jelly Jam, and I'm gonna check this to see if this is on the Minneapolis Genius stuff with Pepe Willie. And it's probably the original one. I would not be surprised if it's floating around on on YouTube. So, before I do the second episode, I'm going to check around. I meant to do that before I started taping, but excited about doing this, so I forgot to do that. So, but Jelly Jam, is this the second part of the song. So starts disco, goes funk, and Prince, the very first album, he's splicing different songs together, and Prince became famous. I mean, Bat Dance is one of the most famous of Prince's, marriage of different, splices of different songs. Really love the drums and percussion in this song as well. So the other standout is I'm Yours, one of the other ones. And this is the first, glimpse of Prince as kind of like that guitar rock god. Interestingly enough, he sings it in falsetto, and not much, hard rock was then, before then or since, was sung in falsetto. I mean, Paul Stanley did it, would do it later, in falsetto. And then Prince would follow this up with Bambi and another rock song in his second album, Prince, and sing that in falsetto too. Again, so it was a little different because hard rock is not usually done in falsetto. one of the other standouts for me on this album is My Love Is Forever. And you know, the guitar solo on it is one of my all time favorites that Prince ever did. Studio favorites. Now, you know, his live solos are a whole different story, but people kind of sleep on this, you know, song in general. I think that the lyrics are very well done. But that guitar solo is already telling you what kind of a talent. I mean, when people look at For You, they think about I'm Yours, but Prince already has shown a lot of versatility in this solo with My Love Is Forever. That tells you where he is already as a guitarist, you know, by the play and how, you know, it fits so well. I mean, you know, people think Prince and they think guitar, they think Let's Go Crazy and stuff, but, you know, this guitar solo, My Love Is Forever, really, foreshadows Prince when I think he really jumps out and into an elite guitarist, arguably one of the best in the world in you know, in the 2007 to 2012 era when he really carved out his niche as a guitarist in these mid-tempo songs that he did so well back then. One of the things I wish Prince would have done as he went along his career is revisit these songs. I mean, Prince often would, from time to time, particularly, you know, once he left, you know, Warner throughout the 90s and the 2000s and even into the 2010s, he would revisit some of these old cuts. And Prince never did that with For You. It's almost like he forgot the album. I forgot that it existed. I mean, to my knowledge, Just As Long As We're Together, I mean, that was played in the Dirty Mind tour. I don't think he played it again. Um, Soft and Wet, I mean, was played at the Detroit birthday show in 1986. And that's pretty, you know, we were getting the next episode of Bootlegs. We'll talk about how important the Detroit birthday show was to, you know, the hardcore Prince fans who, you know, were into the bootlegs when they hit in the early 90s. It was you know, he did a melody because, Prince controversy is mostly controversy, a little bit of Dirty Mind. 1999 was 1999 controversy and a little bit of Dirty Mind. Purple Rain was all of Purple Rain, 1999, and that was about it. He, you know, you know, maybe a little bit of controversy. I think, you know, from Syracuse, he only did Do Me Baby. And so, you know, we were not used to, you know, hearing that old stuff at, you know, what we considered old stuff. And then, you know, so Prince, about 20 minutes into the Detroit 1986 birthday show, you know, jumps into Soft and Wet and the crowd goes wild. I remember I got that bootleg. It's like, oh, I got to hear that. And then the next song is I Want to Be Your Lover. And, you know, Prince hadn't done that since the Dirty Mind tour either. So, but yeah, I wish, you know, particularly Just As Long As We're Together, I wish you would have revisited that at some point because that song had so much potential. It was such a good song. And I mean, it didn't really hit the charts. It should have, but you know, it's kind of hit or miss on your first album. So I wish you you know, revisited a little bit more, throughout his career. Um, So Prince innovations. On his album, so he did swap out the orchestra and Baby for synthesizer strings, and so you know, I covered, I think, Prince and branding in the '90s, and you know, one of the branding episodes, I you know broke down kind of you know a little not into the music theory of the Detroit sound, but you know what Prince did to kind of define that. And of course, I mean, it was getting rid of the live drummer, going to the drum machine, particularly the Linn drums, and getting rid of the horns and using synthesizer brass, and also getting rid of the orchestras and putting in the synth strings. So he did the synthesizer strings here for Baby, probably more than likely the ARP Omni. That was the string synthesizer used. I know he was a big proponent of that. Rick James was as well. So the one thing he did not do yet is he did not, add the drum machine. This is all live drums, and this is all Prince playing the drums. And the reason for that is, he was a Linn drum guy as the first really big digital drum machine. And Prince, I mean, I'm not going to say Prince never used analog drums, but he was not an analog drum fan. And so folks were using drum machines at this time, but Prince was not, as I said, has never really messed with analog drums. And of course, the famous of all the analog drums is the 808. But the difference between the digital drum set and the analog drum set is the digital drum set tries to mimic in some ways as close to a drum, a regular drum set. And, a, analog drums are, they're their own thing. I mean, they sound, computerized or synthetic. What is the TR-808, the Roland drum machine, analog drum machine, was it famous for? Well, the hi-hats now that folks like to use in trap, but that big fat bass drum. Think going back to Cali with um, LL Cool J and that boom 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 boom. That you don't even need a bass guitar or a synth bass when you use that 808 drum because it's so fat. And you know think of cars driving around with that big subwoofer, but they don't put the proper insulation so the frame of the car is shaking. That's the 808. That's essentially what the 808 is famous for. And Prince was never rolling that on that. He just never got into the analog drums. So it'll be later when Prince would change the face of music overall outside of rock and roll, and jump in and to the drum machine and the Linn drum machine. So hey, this has been fun. Episode 1, my boy Prince for you. Thanks for coming through. Got more coming. I'm gonna be on this Prince path for a while because he has close to 40 albums, and yeah, I've listened to them all, and we're gonna do them all. So yeah, thanks for coming through. Got 5 albums out of my own. Peter Exodus O'Coffer, Exodus is on the albums, and I've written 2 fantasy science fiction novels and a novella on Amazon, paperback and digital. Peter Exodus O'Coffer, Amazon. So check that out too. I appreciate you coming through, and see you next episode.